My name is Sarah, and I teach the flute and music in general. And today I wanted to talk about something that's impacted my life really deeply, super important to me, and something that I think affects a lot of other people aside from me. I wanted to address what I feel is potentially a misconception about where performance anxiety comes from. It's not 100% a misconception because performance anxiety can come from many different things, and there are all kinds of different people in the world, and it's going to be different for each of them. The misconception I feel about performance anxiety is that it comes solely from the fear of making a mistake. And the reason why you would be afraid of making a mistake is because of how it impacts how others perceive you. So the idea is that if you make a mistake in front of these people, you're going to be afraid of being cast out from that group. And this comes from an evolutionary standpoint where if you aren't firmly a part of a group, if your role in that group is undefined and people don't know why you're there, so they cast you out, it's harder to find food and it's harder to maintain your life, literally to stay alive. And so some people think that that's a fear that's human instinct, almost like you're in survival mode, kind of. So I feel that that's valid. That's not really what's happening for me. So the misconception is that that's the only thing that can be causing it. It took me a lot of figuring, a lot of learning, a lot of thinking, a lot of digging to figure out what I think did cause my performance anxiety. Rather than my performance anxiety coming from the fear of making a mistake, I realized that it was coming from the fear of not being able to recover from a mistake. The difference between those two is that one is purely perfectionism. You actually just can't stand the idea of an imperfect performance. And then the other is kind of a learning deficit that I realized I had. So I realized that I was going basically purely on muscle memory. When I would go to practice my passages, I would do them super diligently, and I would practice them in all the ways that people told me to. So I would do chunking, I would play backwards. I thought that my problem was stamina somehow. So I would say, okay, today I'm going to practice getting through this much music at once. So I would play one line. Okay, great. I got through one line of music. Okay, now let's see if I can play through two lines. Okay, great. And then I would do that starting from the beginning every time, trying to build up my stamina. And it kind of would help in a way. I was building up this muscle memory. And so I would do that over and over and over again to kind of assure myself that I was going to be able to get through the performance, whatever the performance was. The problem with that, though, is anything could interrupt that. Something could happen in the room, you get a little distracted. You have your own thoughts, you get a little distracted. And the thoughts could even be positive thoughts. You could be thinking, wow, I sound so good right now. This hall is so resonant. That is certainly enough to disrupt the muscle memory. And the result of that is that you fall apart. And then if you're only going on muscle memory, it's really hard to hop back on the train because you haven't practiced from where you fell apart. So there is a method of practicing where you do kind of pinpoint your fall apart spots and then try to start from those and then start a little further back and start a little further back. Really good way to practice, but it really depends on how you're learning and what your problem is. For me, that was not effective. So the kind of practicing I was doing, in a way, was actually extremely thorough. There was no world in which I could be called a lazy person. I was in the practice room for hours. And it wasn't for nothing, but it was not helping me become a better performer. I was getting better at the flute, but I wasn't getting better at music, if that makes sense. And it was really frustrating for me and for my mentors because I just felt so drained. And people around me couldn't really understand why. And people were confused because I was practicing so much. So what's my problem? And I was asking myself too, what's my problem? Why am I doing all this work it's like this kind of the same amount of work that everyone else is doing, but I'm seeing like no results or way fewer results than the people around me. Like, and so the comparison game also was off the charts and not really healthy. So my experience with performance anxiety is that I would do all this practicing, this really super diligent practicing, and I literally would not know what was going to happen. I mean, it's not as if I didn't know at all what the music was going to sound like, but I didn't know if I was going to mess up or if it was going to go fine. Like, it was really like 50-50 what was going to happen. Started feeling like failure was inevitable. Because I couldn't predict if something was going to distract me enough to break the muscle memory that I built up. So for a long time, I kind of thought it was like an attention problem. Like, I needed to figure out how to have the perfect focus. And there is some of that. I did feel that exploring that helped me a little bit. And then I also noticed that the most successful people in ensembles, they did have a certain level of focus the entire time. And that did solve some problems. But not all of them. There was still this fundamental issue of like, is this gonna be completely ruined if I make one mistake? So this is pretty terrifying. I mean, there is the whole idea of, in the end, what's the worst that's gonna happen if you crash and burn? Yeah, the worst that would happen is maybe some people wouldn't like me as much. Maybe some people wouldn't respect me as much, but I wouldn't die. But that's operating under the assumption that the reason why you're so afraid is purely the judgment. Purely the judgment. But again, the reason I was so afraid was because, like, I just wasn't going to be able to recover from the mistake that I was making. And again, I guess you could relate that to a fear of judgment, but like, it was also like just a fear of the whole life failure. Like, I'm not able to figure out how to do this. I'm not able to figure out how to perform. What am I even doing here at all? It's not even like, oh, Johnny in the third row, he's not going to think I'm a good flute player anymore. It was that, but it was more than that. It was like, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to earn money when I get out of here? Like, how can I justify the time that I am here if this is the reality and I can't even get through one piece without falling apart? Like, this obviously is not going to be the career I have. So that's like a much more fundamental, like, existential feeling than just being a little worried that somebody who's watching you isn't going to respect you quite as much after you play. What I realized was that I was not engaging my conscious memory enough. I wasn't actually cataloging what was going on in the music in a conceptual, overarching way. Like, say you have variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. If you're not thinking about, like, okay, in variation 1, what exactly are we varying? Then it's hard to remember. So I shifted to thinking of things more conceptually. I started practicing more conceptually and actually got more involved in jazz. I think that people who are learning jazz are more harmonically conscious. They're more aware of what the harmonies are and how they are working around those harmonies. So what does it mean to consciously engage with the concepts of the music? Some people might not like this answer, but for me, it was music theory. For me, it was building a foundation of knowledge about the pieces I was looking at. Now, this does not mean that you can't be a good musician without learning music theory. There are plenty of people who play at a really high level. They don't necessarily know music theory in the way that I use it to learn my music. I have kind of become convinced over time that those people are cataloging some kind of information. They're consciously engaging with music in some way that has a strong enough tie for them that they can navigate that freely. But for me, it's music theory. It's got to be music theory, I found for myself. So say you have a note of music you're pretty sure is the melody note. And we can talk about how to figure that out. Like what notes are the melody notes. Let's talk about that another time. But like, let's say your melody note is C. You have the note C. You know it's your melody note. And then you have a C sharp, a B, and then a C. Think about how that's the note above C, note below C, and then C. So that's a pattern. That's a concept. You're surrounding your melody note. Okay, now instead of having 3 different notes to memorize, you have 1 note to memorize and a concept to back it up. C, that's your foundational note. That's your functional note. And then C sharp and B are decorative notes. They're the concept notes. And then let's say your next melody note is E. So that would be part of the C major chord. And then let's say you've got an F, and then a D sharp, and then an E. Something that may look like 3 separate notes. But if you think about it, it's the same concept before. The note above your melody note, the note below your melody note, and your melody note. So that's happened twice. So you've got an E and this concept of surrounding notes. You can take it even further and link C and E together in your mind. C and E are part of the C major triad. So now all those 6 different notes can become one thing in your head. You log them as one thing. C major triad is happening. And let's just say the next thing that happens is G. And let's say you've got G sharp, F sharp, G. So you've just done the same surrounding note thing with G. So you might know where I'm going with this. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different notes. That might seem like 9 completely unrelated, disparate things that are hard to remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then you turn them into one idea in your head. This is a C arpeggio. I started allowing myself the luxury of spending most of my practice time on concepts. So if there's a pattern, I notice this happening a lot in my music. Mama, stop playing that music. Practice that concept on every single note. And then you can do it chromatically, like whatever pattern you have going on around C, and then do it around C sharp, and then do it around D, or you can do it in the circle of fifths or circle of fourths order. And sometimes I'll do all of those things just to make sure I'm really driving the concept home. And then when I go back to practice the music, I have so much more facility. I'll take a piece of music and try my best to figure out the harmonic progression behind it. Sometimes that's easier to do than other times, but forget about rhythm, forget about timing. I'll think, okay, this measure, and then I'll play just the arpeggio of that harmony. It doesn't matter how long it takes. If it's an arpeggio I'm not as used to, well, I'll take as long as I need to remember the notes that are in that arpeggio, and then just play through those, and then link them to that measure, or whatever, maybe you find that arpeggio lasts for 5 measures. Link them to those 5 measures. And then go to the next one and do that for as big a chunk as you can manage. Cut yourself some slack if it feels difficult, because if you've never practiced that way, it is going to be difficult. This is all predicated on knowing at the very least, all of my major scales and major arpeggios, at the least. And you kind of build from there, like learn different scales and modes. And then you learn how the harmonies that you can build from those scales usually most often relate to each other. So if this sounds familiar, 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, and then you start learning which harmonies can replace those. Are there chords that you can use instead of the 4 chord that do the same thing that the 4 chord does? And then you just expand and expand and expand and expand your vocabulary that you then apply to these conceptual processes. So the number of concepts you know is going to help your conceptual practice. So keep adding to the number of concepts you know. Now, I kind of like to think of all of this concept building as like lights on a Christmas tree, where the Christmas tree is the structure that the lights get placed on. Now, say you're in like dark room at night, but the Christmas lights are on. You don't really see the tree, but you see the lights. So the lights are the music. The lights are the notes that the musician would actually be playing. And even if one of the lights droops a little bit and is in the wrong spot, like the whole strand of lights, you get the idea. The whole strand of lights is still there because the tree is there holding the lights up. So that's like having a deep understanding of your music and then using that as the cushion that you fall back on if you make a mistake. Because you know, this is the C major measure. Next measure is the whatever chord you figured out the next measure was based on. You know that's coming up. So even if you play the entire C major measure wrong, you still have a chance of knowing like how to recover in the next measure. You're not just adrift in the sea of muscle memory. So using muscle memory in this analogy would be like throwing all the Christmas lights in the air. Like, okay, you stack up your lights in this perfect coil. So that you're hoping that when you throw them in the air, you can take this picture of them kind of in a Christmas tree shape as they're falling down. Like, what if you don't press a button in time? And then all the lights just fall on the ground. And you only have that one small opportunity to get that picture. And it is very likely that you won't. You're going to have to try again and again and again and again and again and again and again to get that proper picture. So I know which one I choose and which one I will choose forever. It is the firm foundation of knowledge. So that's how I kind of went from being a complete mess to thinking like, I think I want to schedule a recital tour. Like, how can I get this going? I want to play some more recitals. That was fun. That's how I went from one to the other. If this resonates with you, like, feel free to reach out. And you can start from literally zero knowledge. You can start from zero and gain knowledge a little bit at a time. Please don't be afraid of music theory. I tried to do music school when I was 17 years old, and obviously I had these problems then, but I did not have the insight or the ability to investigate what was going on as I do now. So at that time, I just quit. I just quit because I kept thinking that it was extremely uncomfortable. It was like a really unpleasant situation to be in, and I thought, if this feels this unpleasant, then it must just not be for me. So I quit music for a long time. So I'm super grateful to people who allowed me to kind of come back to the academic setting and explore what the heck was going on. So I hope that helps somebody. It sure helped me. If there's anybody out there who wants to talk about this and work with me through this, either just talking or lessons or anything, comments, I would be more than happy. This is something that's become really important to me, close to my heart. I would love to help other people through this. If you haven't found your solution, this could be your solution. Thank you and happy practicing.